My name, by the way, is TeresaMenendezMyers. I am a whiskey ambassador for Diageo. My official title is Master of Whiskey. I'm one of 16 Masters of Whiskey for Diageo. It is my job to learn as much as I can about whiskey and come and share it with you. I know it's a tough job, right? Now, normally when I say Master of Whiskey, people are expecting, an Irish fella, or a Scottish bloke. And instead they have a 5'2" Latina. Huh? Well, fortunately for me, they were looking for a Spanish-speaking Master of Whiskey to cover South Central Texas. My mom is from Mexico, my dad Cuban. Y en la casa siempre se habla español. So I jumped at the chance. Huh? And that's why I'm here with you today. Now, one of the things that I found fascinating is, a lot of people say, well, Spanish speakers, what? Well, Latin Americans drink a whole lot of whiskey. Sometimes more so than our own native spirit. I mean, growing up, my dad always had Scotch whiskey in the cupboard. Granted, growing up, I think that the reason he had Scotch whiskey is because none of us knew what to do with it. We wouldn't touch it. I'm sure he's very happy to know that I've acquired a taste for Scotch whiskey. He's probably a little upset that he's not around to enjoy many of my samples, but yeah. Nonetheless, we're going to go through a quick Whiskey 101. Now, did everyone get your whiskeys filled? We still have some missing blanks here? One more? Mm-hmm. There we go. Perfect. All right. So we're going to do a quick Whiskey 101. Now, what is whiskey? Whiskey, of course, is a centuries-old tradition brought to the area by monks who traveled the world, bringing back with them the alembic still. Yeah? Now, the term whiskey comes from the Gaelic term uiscebag. Uiscebag meaning water of life. It was later shortened to uisca and then translated to whiskey. Yes, sir? I'll send her your way. One or the other. Now, has everyone got their fill on whiskey? If a glass should evaporate as we move along, just raise your hand. All right? I'll try to keep it short, but it could happen. I understand. I'm going to ask you to walk around and pass some of these out. No? All right, so Emily, as I talk, is going to pass out some books. Those are the books I was talking about. If you guys are interested in them, just raise your hand. If not, there you go. She'll just pass them out and leave them there. So we got whiskey. Now, there's 3 simple ingredients when it comes to whiskey. You've got barley, yeast, and Scottish spring water. Very simple. That said, whiskey, basic translation of a whiskey is a spirit that's derived from a natural grain, whether it's malted barley, rye, cereal, unmalted barley, corn, maize. Yeah? So 5 simple steps when it comes to whiskey. It's malting, mashing, fermentation, distillation, and maturation. I always look at my notes because I always forget the order they come in. So we're going to go over that real quick. Now, what is malting? Yeah? Malting basically is artificial germination. I am going to pass out some of these glasses, 1 to each table. I'm going to ask Emily to come back. This is malted barley. We're going to pass it around. Let you guys pass it around. Smell it. Take a couple grains also, if you will, and chew on it. What is malting? They take the barley, they basically steep in water, they trick the barley into growing. I tell people that it's similar to that science project when you took the lima bean, put it on a wet napkin, put it on the windowsill. So you trick the lima bean into growing, and as it grows, that's what they're doing with the barley. They're sprouting it. They're allowing it to resprout. They're allowing more starch to be made and created with that barley. Yeah, more starch is going to render more alcohol. Right? Now, there's certain areas of Scotland that getting wood to those areas or getting coal to those areas weren't easy. Not to mention that in Scotland, one of your main kind of heat sources is peat. Now, being born and raised in South Texas, I had no idea what peat was. This is peat. We're going to pass some chunks of peat around so you guys can take a look at them. They don't necessarily smell like anything. They're not brownies. They don't taste like anything either. Yeah? So we'll pass these down. Now the one thing, and if you guys would be kind enough to pass them down that way, and I'm going to ask Emily to, the last 2 rows, please, get these down to them. What you will notice, though, is you'll see all the roots and vegetations coming through. So what peat is years and years of compressed vegetation. So thanks to all that great rain that falls in Scotland, you've got great moss, great grass, great heather, and just years and years of it growing upon itself. So you go, what they do is they basically take this out of the ground, and it's so full of roots and vegetation, they allow it to dry. This turns into a fuel source, similar to the concept of the Duralog. Yeah? So what happens in a fire, you know, when you add leaves and twigs and such to a fire, what happens? You get smoke, absolutely. Would you pass one of these to each table? They're not these little ones. So what they do is that once it's grown, once that little barley has been growing, in order to stop the growth, they will lay it on some screens. Now they put it in a kiln. They light a fire underneath. Some areas, again, use peat. By using peat, you get smoke. So that hot air goes through and it dries the grain. It stunts the growth, if you will. Yeah? By drying the grain, now we can actually use it. Yeah? But certain areas where they're using more peat, you get more smoke. This barley that's being passed out now has actually been dried with peat. So I'm going to let some of this go by. There you go. And again, if you feel daring, try some of the grain. I've done tastings before where they come back about empty. People think they're great snack food. So that's actually where we get our smoke. Now, when we refer to smoky whiskeys, that's where it comes from. It comes in that drying process. That's where the smoke comes into the whiskey at that stage. Okay? So what happens then? They take the grain. They grist it. They mill it into a flour. They take that flour. They steep it in water. And they separate the starch from the grain, that starchy water. I tell people, think of when you're rinsing rice. It's the same concept. As you rinse the rice, you get that cloudy water coming through. Now, those leftover spents, anything that those of you who are daring, and you're now chewing on this thinking, why did I chew on it? Well, that is also used as well. That's used for the livestock. So it's all a very green process. So they take that starchy water, and they add yeast. Now they add yeast, they allow it to ferment, the yeast goes in, eats up that starch, eats up the sugars, creating carbon dioxide, and most importantly, alcohol. So the fermentation process tends to be around 48 hours or so. But different distilleries will actually ferment longer. Longer fermentation tends to give a more mature, kind of fruity flavor. Okay? We'll touch on that. Basic, 48 hours. However, you've got many, for example, Oban will actually ferment for about 100 plus. You have Craigenmore that ferments 60 to 80. Yeah. So it varies. No, they vary depending on the flavor they want to put in. No? Granted, we can check. I did say I was part of the Master of Whiskey program, but I tell people, even though I just recently turned 4, I always say that I'm a mere apprentice to the Master of Whiskey program. As you may know, we are all mere apprentice by attending events such as these. Now, there's so many whiskeys out there that it's quite a challenge to know about as much as I can. I work at it. Yeah? All right. So after fermentation, of course, what do we end up with? We end up with a wort. Right? We end up with a low wine. We end up with a beer, if you will. And that's where distillation comes in. Yeah? So they add that into the still. And distillation, the process behind distillation is just the simple fact that alcohol evaporates at a much lower temperature than water. Yeah? So as they start heating the onion, you could say, those alcohol vapors start rising. And only the finest actually make it around the curve. As they make it around the curve, they, of course, make contact with the copper, start to condense, and come on through. Now, you'll hear many distilleries talk about the different shapes of their still. And the different shapes will actually either extend only the finer vapors, making it a taller still. Some of your squattier actually make more contact with the copper, because as they make contact here, they come down and come back again. Well, all that contact, all that affects the flavor of the whiskey. So after distilling twice, what we end up with is new make, distillate, moonshine, if you will. You know, I haven't seen that show on moonshiners, but I saw the advertisements for it. I've got to check it out. All right, so here we've got two distillates, two new makes. This is actually at about 120 proof or so, probably a little more than that. For those of you who are interested, because I'm assuming many of us are, interested in sampling and smelling, I will pass it around. However, not so you can pour it in your glass. It's in a nice special glass, so you can actually take a couple drops. If you're interested in trying it, just a little dab will do you. It'll give you the idea of the flavor behind it. If you're not feeling that daring, rub it on your hands. After rubbing it on your hands, smell. And it'll give you an idea of what basically new whiskey is prior to maturation. Now I have two of them. The first one that's going to go, and these will actually have to follow each other, simply because the first one is one of the examples of our lowland whiskey that doesn't have any peat. So there you're going to have a whiskey that was made with that first grain that was sampled. Second one, however, this is actually Lagavulin. So this is the peatiest one in our portfolio. And so this will be similar to the second grain that was sampled. Yeah? Go ahead and pass that around. Thank you. And then, now one of the things that I find interesting is that a lot of people actually used to consume whiskey at that stage. Yeah? Back then, that's the way it was consumed initially. However, there wasn't many glass containers. There was definitely no plastic. Yeah? So when storing their whiskey, what would they do? They actually filled what there was a lot of sherry barrels. So they'd fill up those sherry barrels, take them down, maybe barter with your local grocers or some of your blenders. Now let's say the blender already had some of that make and said, I'll leave it in the warehouse. And months went by, and maybe even possibly a year. After time went by, they realized, that whiskey is no longer clear. It actually has a great color to it. Yeah? Then they sampled it side by side and realized, it's got some great vanilla notes as well. Or in that case, it would have some more fruitier notes. Because it would have been a sherry cask, would have been a European oak. Now, why does that happen? Well, by maturing in an oak cask, oak is actually porous. And so as it heats up, as it warms up, it's a perfect use for it. As it heats up, as it warms up, what happens is the whiskey will seep into the wood, yeah, because the oak expands. Any of those who have hardwood floors know the difference when it gets really cold or after it's rained, how the wood expands and contracts, yeah? So, of course, as it gets cold, the wood contracts and the whiskey seeps out. And it's that interaction with the wood, season after season, that actually does three things to it. It'll filter out any leftover impurities the whiskey might have. It'll also give back to the whiskey. It gives the great color. It gives a lot of great flavoring, yeah, to the whiskey. Overall, it's a great marriage. It's a great enhancing of working together with the wood. So that, in essence, is the basic steps to making whiskey. That's a quick Whiskey 101. Do we have any questions so far? All right, so I'll stop torturing you and we'll get to the good stuff. Let's get to the whiskey. All right, so the first whiskey we have is going to be on the bottom left or on your left. Over here, everyone? First glass is Oban. Oban, also known as Oban. However, the correct pronunciation is actually Obin, by the way. It's very confusing. You know, to be honest, we don't care how you say it as long as you order it and enjoy it. That's all right with us. All right, so Oban. Oban actually translates from Gaelic into little bays. Yeah? Oban is considered the bridge, the go-between of the Highland whiskies, the smooth, complex Highland whiskies, the sweet Highland whiskies, with your Islas, yeah? With some of that coast, some of that salt. Now, at this point, I know many people think that we really enjoy ourselves, hearing ourselves talk, but I don't. My husband might argue with me, but I don't. So I'm going to actually ask you guys to help and participate with me. Yeah? So as we go through it, I want you guys to give back, to let me know what you're smelling, what you're tasting. Now, unlike many people who may argue and say that, you know, there's certainly certain ways, I think that there's no wrong answer when it comes to whiskey. Because as you're smelling and as you're tasting, what happens is you're sparked by a memory. And it's normally a memory of something you've tried before, something you might have had. When you're around 10 years old, what did you have during the holidays? First main meal. Lasagna. There you go. What about you? Tamales. All right. Well, remember I said Mom was from Mexico, Dad Cuban. Yeah, well, there was a couple times Dad actually cooked, and what he did was he made a braised pork called a lechon asado. Yeah, they marinate the pork for over 24 hours in great citrus, garlic, and juices. Then they slow cook it for about 5 to 6 hours till the meat basically falls off the bone. Can you tell I miss Dad's cooking? Point being, we all have different memories, and so different thoughts when we're smelling, when we're tasting. Now, granted, I did a tasting once where I said that, and you had someone, and you start smelling, and he starts saying out loud, summer of '78, off the coast of Maine. So, there's all sorts of memories that can be sparked through whiskey. Yeah? All right, so let's smell again. What do you guys get? All right, do you get some sweetness? I tend to get sometimes like an orange zest. Not like an orange, but an orange zest, as if you've walked into the bar and someone just finished cutting the peels for the twist. Now, the other thing is, you know, being from South Texas, we tend to go to the coast, and inevitably we have to drive at least 2 hours to get to a beach, right? And because of our weather, of course, we drive with the windows up and the AC. So finally, you get there, and right before you get there, you got to cross a bridge. And that's when you nudge your friend, and you're like, all right, turn off the AC, roll down the windows, let's get used to the heat. So you roll down the windows, you start making it up the bridge, and as you start crossing, you start smelling that coast, that salt. You'll even hear a seagull or two in the background, yeah? Smell the oven again. Does that remind anyone else about that experience? Maybe that's just my memory. I get a little saltiness. I get a little beach. Like what?
Bait shrimp.
Bait shrimp. There you go. That's it. You know, while I'm on that bridge, that's what I'm smelling maybe. All right, anybody else? Y'all are very quiet. All right, young lady. You've tried this before. Come on.
I get some like cherry in there.
Some cherry? And here's the thing, there's no wrong answer. There really isn't. Now, remember, Oben's been aged in bourbon barrels. So you might get some vanilla. Yeah? All right, so enough torture. As we look it up, we see the nice color, nice golden straw. As you've been swirling it, have you noticed the legs coming down? It's the viscosity of the whiskey. It actually shows us the richness that you're going to find in it. All right, so let's take a little sip. Now take a little sip, hold it in your mouth, let it coat your mouth, let it coat your tongue. Let's explore the flavors that you're going to find. What do you guys get? Some sweetness. All right, come on. Some spiciness. Well, you know, one of the things to keep in mind, of course, with all of these Scotch whiskies is that there are higher proof. Now, Oben is at 43%. So it's 86, maybe not cast strength like many of the people I've run into out there. We're big fans of cast strength. But it is higher proof than what we're average used to, 80 proof. That said, do you guys all have water? And if not, can we get you some? Oh, there you go. Add a little bit of water. Now, there's going to be some purists who say, no, don't add water. And you know, I say, try it once. Try it this time. Explore with me. And if you don't like it, I'll pour you another one out there, and we don't have to add water to that one. All right? Now, adding water. There's a lot of people that say that by adding water, what we're doing is we're opening up the whiskey. Yeah? Similar to decanting a red wine. So after adding water, smell again. Does it change the smell? Does it change the aroma? Some more caramel notes coming through. I tell people, think about this, particularly with our summers. You know, it's hot, and sometimes you don't smell much. But after we get one of those great kind of summer showers come through, and you go outside again, what happens? Grass, you know, trees, concrete. You smell it all. So by adding a little bit of water, you'll notice as the oils break up in the whiskey, we open up the whiskey. We're allowing more flavors to come through. All right, so take another sip with the water. Did it change the flavor? No wrong answer, guys. Yes. All right. What came through more? I get more oaky notes after adding some water, but it's more like a kind of a richer sweetness, but that's just me.
Someone behind me said fruit earlier. I taste more of the fruit now with the water.
With the water. Yeah. So you see, no wrong way to drink whiskey. It's a different way to drink whiskey. So I always say, try them both, find out what works best for you. Because, you know, there are some whiskeys that I feel are actually better without water. Huh? So try them all, try them both ways, see what works best for you. All right, so next we have Oban 18. That'll be the second glass. All right. Oban 18, by the way, is quite a treat for us. It's a treat for us on many ways. One, Oban 18 is actually exclusive to the United States. This is not being sold or offered to other countries. You know, as I mentioned, Oban is actually the #1 selling single malt for us here in the States. I believe as a treat, and because of the popularity of the 18-year-old whiskeys here in the States, they've actually released Oban 18 just for us. All right. I don't want to give you the answer, so let's go ahead and smell it real quick, and then we'll share and see if your thoughts are the same as mine. What do you smell? Has anyone's whiskey evaporated, by the way? Will you offer? It's like there's a very little in mine. I don't know if anyone else got a very little pour. I got a very little one. So, if it did evaporate, raise your hand. Emily will be kind enough to give you a little bit more. Let's go ahead and take a quick sip of the Oban 18. What do you think? It's very smooth. One of the things that I love about the Oban 18 is that I find it very exquisite. It's as if we've taken the Oban 14 in those extra 4 years, really just enriched what is Oban 14. So it's as if you took, well, at least for me, you know, like that orange zest, that candied, kind of candied ginger, you know, flavor notes that come out of the Oban 14. And then you put them in a pan and you caramelize them. And what happens? You just get this richness coming through. That's what I get with Oban 18. Huh? What about you guys? It's actually the same proof. I actually find it to be a bit smoother, though, than the other one, personally. And for those purists that are out there, I kind of don't want to add water to this one. But, again, we have more over in the corner, so if you're feeling dairy, you can add a couple drops. Let's see if it changes a bit. Cask strength. Cask strength. Cask strength is will be about 57%. So you're looking at about 114 proof. We actually have a couple of those at Diageo, and within our whiskey line. We don't tend to do many of those. We will do rare bottlings. For example, our Lagavulin 12 year that we're going to try here in a little bit is going to be a cask strength. Yeah, so that means we don't add water at the end to kind of lower the proof and bring it to neutral. You know, I know that in Europe the standard is a little different from what our standard is. Now, of course, here we've got all sorts of legal entities that like to control and make sure, you know, that proofs are kept steady. With regards to Scotch whiskey, it's not so much the case. However, you have special bottlings, and a lot of those are cask strength. You know, with our company, one of the good things of our company is that we have to keep, is that for me, by the way? Oh, great, all right. So one of the things about our company is that we like to keep consistency. Yeah, well, let's move on to the next one, and I'll start talking faster. All right, so the next is Talisker. Talisker is from the Isle of Skye. It is actually the only distillery on the Isle of Skye. One of the beautiful memories, it's home to the great, grandiose Cullen Mountains. You know, I try to tell people, think of those great mountains that you saw as we were driving through. And we were going through the mountains, and it started misting, and I just, you know, I looked up, and I just was waiting for, you know, Mel Gibson and the rest of his crew to come down, running down the mountain. All right. I can't do. I can't stop moving, but I'll try. All right, so Talisker. Let's go ahead and nose Talisker real quick. Talisker here. You definitely get more of that influence of the coast, of the smoke. Yeah? Go and see if any of our props are left so you can start picking them up just about the end of them. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a quick sip of Talisker 10, by the way.
This is Talisker 10.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I can't be as chatty or ask for your advice at this one because we need to wrap it up. But feel free to offer it. What do you guys get? Smoke. Yeah? Dirt. Earth. Yeah? You know, it's funny, I tell people that being from South Texas, one of my best ways to describe Talisker, or what it reminds me of a brisket that's been smoked for hours. And the only thing they added to it was like a coarse salt and black pepper rub. Because that first bite, all you get is smoke. And then you get that hint of salt and that black pepper finish at the end. It helps that my husband's a great barbecuer and likes to smoke a lot of items. All right, so if you get a chance, add some water to Talisker. Out of all our whiskeys, I feel that Talisker is the one that most changes with the addition of water. It actually sweetens up a bit. What do you think after adding some water? Very good? Yeah? I've had people who are not fans of peat, not fans of smoke, that actually, after doing a tasting of all our whiskeys, their favorite ended up being Talisker with a little bit of water. I think of all our whiskeys, adding the water to this one really balances out well. All right, with that said, let's move to the next one. Now, the next one, if you're in an arch, of course, is the next arch. If you have it in 2 rows, will be the top right. Yes. Are we all good? The next one, by the way, is Talisker 18. Now, this is an added treat for the simple reason that Talisker 18, the first time it made it to the States, I believe won the #1 selling, it was the #1 rated single malt Scotch. Granted, we haven't seen it in the States for a while, and if it's any consolation, the last time I was in Scotland, not even Talisker had Talisker 18. So we're really lucky to have it back and definitely have it here. So if you get a chance to go find it in your local store, I would definitely pick up a bottle or two, because this is one of those whiskeys that's hard to come by. So let's go ahead and take a nice smell. Go see if the guy in the yellow knows which one's next. See if he's not confused. Yeah? You know, I feel like the comedians where the red light's blinking, so if I start talking faster, it's because there's a red light back there. All right, so what do we think of the 18? I heard that's nice, but very faintly. Yeah? You know, it gives it a nice richness. It's, again, it's as if those extra 4, well, in this case, 8 years really caramelized all the flavors. That combination, that time spent with those barrels really comes through and enriches everything up. This one I'm scared to add water to as well, so I'm not gonna. I'm making a stand. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one is Lagavulin 12. Now, Lagavulin, by the way, is one of 2 of our single malt distilleries on Isla. Yeah? Isla, of course, is known for its smoky, its peatiness. We've got a handful of distilleries, and everyone knows that a whiskey from Isla is a smoky, peaty. Lagavulin is the smokiest and the richest of our whiskeys. Now, however, what we're going to try first is the Lagavulin 12-year. This is a rare malt. That means that where normally we wait 16 years to get that great rich smokiness, here it's doing quite well at 12. You're getting a great intensity, but just a slight lightness to it. I see some people comparing, very smart. You'll see the differences right off the bat on the 12 versus the 16. The 16 has a little darker, a little more amber notes to it. Do you need some water? All right. Now, before you take a big sip of the Lagavulin 12, Lagavulin 12 is one of those that's going to be at cask strength. This is about 57 proof. So you want to take a little sip and then add a little water. Huh? What happened? You can tell the difference, that's correct. Let's add a little water to it. You know, so much different from the 16. The 12-year tends to have a nice subtle smoke. It's a nice wisp of smoke. It's not as mouth-filling, you could say, as the 16, but it's very steady. It's very engulfing, unlike, let's say, the Talisker. The Talisker tends to have a little more peppery notes. Yeah? That said, let's move on to the 16 before I get the hook. What do you get on the nose? Smoke. Now I'm going to tell you about my Lagavulin 16. Because I do talk a lot about food, and I talked about the brisket, I say that Lagavulin, going back to that brisket, it's as if they took the brisket out of the smoker, they lathered on the heaviest, thickest, richest, sweetest barbecue sauce they could find, and they decided they were going to put it back in the smoker for another hour. Well, 5 hours later, they bring it out, and you get Lagavulin. Huh? Let's take a sip and see if you guys agree with me. What do you get? It's very smoky, but it's very rich. You know, the neat thing about Lagavulin is that first sip, you get kind of even some dark chocolate notes, if you will. And then as it comes through, you get that smoke. You get that richness. You get that finish. Add some water. No, you don't have to. I chose not to on some. I took a stand. I think maybe I would have liked this without the water. Huh? All right, everyone. Well, it seems like they are going to be calling me out any second, and I've probably gone way past my time. So I want to thank you all for coming. If you do have any more questions about Scotch, I apologize that maybe I was unable to maybe touch on them today, but we will be in that far corner at the end. Please come find me. I also have 3 of my colleagues here, and thank you all for coming. And remember, enjoy all the whiskey out there, but remember to enjoy responsibly. Yeah. All right. Cardew is actually a space item.